Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our EMG web chat. Today's topic will discuss the future of trade shows, what has changed in 2020, the trends we are seeing for the future, and alternatives to trade shows if they don't come back or if they come back differently. Okay, my name is Kim Vermeer and I'm your moderator for today. Before we get started, if you have any questions throughout the session, make sure you type them in the chat box and then we'll try and get back to them at the end of the session. All right, so now let me introduce you to today's guests. We have Rikke, Wivel, and Mike Maynard today. Okay, we will go here. So, all right, so we have Mike. Mike is the managing director at Napier, a PR and marketing agency based in the UK, which is also one of our partner companies in the Eurocom network. Mike believes that combining the measurement, accountability, and innovation that he learned as an engineer with a passion for communicating ensures the delivery of great campaigns and tangible return on investment. Hello, Mike. How are you? One moment. Let me switch over to you. Hello.
Hi, Kim. Thanks very much for inviting me to the web chat. I'm great. Thanks.
Thank you. It's good to have you here. All right. So we also have our very own Rikke Wivel. Rikke is CEO here at EMG. She brings with her over 20 years of experience in working in global communication, business strategy, and digital, including online lead generation. And hello, Rikke. Hello.
Hi, Kim, and thank you, Mike, for being here. Looking forward to it.
Thank you both. All right, so we have some interesting topic areas to cover today. 2020 has been a year of drastic change in the world of B2B and B2B communication. Trade shows used to be the #1 way of how companies would gather and generate leads and also network and launch their products. But yeah, this year in-person trade shows have pretty much disappeared. So what kind of effect does this have on sales and marketing? I would like to start with Rikke.
Yes, thank you so much, Kim. It's a very good question, and we've seen a massive change this year. Now, the whole sales funnel for a lot of B2B companies have changed. So trade show used to be the place you would go and you would communicate either big innovations, or you would talk to some of your future clients. Clients, on the other hand, would go there to see what's happening in my industry, but that has completely changed. But the need for leads for the B2B companies and the needs to understand what's going on in your industry for future clients have not changed. So for me, it is much more about how communication has changed and how can the different communicators really help drive the leads down the funnel with other pieces of communication. For me, that's what most communicators we talk to, and also most sales directors we talk to, are very concerned about and also focusing with right now. Mike, do you have any insights to this?
Yeah, I certainly agree, Rikke, and I think it's definitely going to be a situation that isn't just a short-term problem. So for me, I think, in the future, we're going to see trade shows come back, but they're going to be very different. So I think, we're going to see much smaller events. I think there's going to be more of an online element. And really, trade show organizers are going to have to rethink everything. I mean, the truth is we're all on Zoom all day at the moment. And whilst I'm sure we'd all be quite glad to cut down our Zoom time a little bit, even, once the pandemic's over and we're back to more normality, I don't see people giving up with, the new means of communications that they're using. And for that reason, I just don't see that people will have the same trade show infrastructure that we've got today. What do you think, Rikke?
Well, I think that we're seeing different things at the moment. We're so lucky to have part of our business in China, and there you have trade shows back in what's close to full force. But we have seen a change. So it's different type of trade shows because companies are starting thinking about what do I need to do around the trade shows because not everybody can be there. So I think we're going to see some kind of hybrids in the future. I agree with you, it will not be the same thing, but I don't think the need for a moment to communicate disappears. I think the great thing, especially with trade, trade shows, so very niche trade shows, is that you have a moment in time where the whole industry is talking about the same subject matter. And that's what trade shows does very, very well. Now, what we're seeing is how can companies do other activities around these trade shows. For example, online fireside chats, or talk to the people in the booth, or access to the keynote speakers, or even online keynote presentations. And that, I think, is very interesting, what's going to happen within that the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I think that's also going to change the way we see trade shows. I mean, trade shows are going to be much less about an experience of walking around a huge hall, looking at various booths that are put up for 3 or 4 days and then broken down. I think we're going to see these events being very different. So it's going to be much less about large booths, much less about large exhibitors, and much more about speakers and content, and as you say, things like fireside chats. And I think that's going to be tough for some companies. We've been in this situation for nearly a year now, and I see a lot of companies, really struggling to work out what they want to do, and maybe hoping that trade shows come back. And I think particularly for smaller companies, it's going to be tough to work out what they should be doing instead of trade shows. I think bigger companies have a much wider range of opportunities. But it's certainly going to be interesting to see what happens in the future and how people deal with this mixed audience, where it's no longer purely an on-site audience you've got to address with a trade show. It's going to have to be an on-site and also a in the office and at home audience, and that's tough for both exhibitors, but particularly I think in Europe for some of the event organizers. They're going to struggle with this.
Okay, thank you both. You both talked a little bit about virtual events, which is something that I'd like to get into. But there's just one little thing that I'd like to mention to the audience. If you have any questions throughout the session, please make sure that you type them in the chat box. So don't worry, we'll get to those. All right, back to the virtual events. Now that we've seen them begin, are they going to go away? Mike, what do you think?
Well, I definitely don't think they're going to go away. And I think for a lot of events, that could be the biggest part of the event, is the virtual side rather than the physical. We've worked with a lot of clients who've tried different virtual approaches. I mean, one of the things we've done is actually build a platform for clients to create their own virtual trade shows stands. And from us, what we're seeing is clients are using it less probably for virtual trade shows and more as a kind of an ongoing showcase. So, as Rikke said earlier, the events industry is important because it'll bring together people to talk about the same subject at the same time. But for me, what I see is trade shows also morphing into this ability to see and interact, but across the whole year. I don't know. What do you think, Rikke?
I think that's what's beautiful right now. I feel nearly that it's like when websites started coming up, or when social media started coming up. Now you have so many different webinars. Here we are trying to do a web chat. You have online exhibitions. Everybody's running into the space to try and fulfill the need there clearly is. Not everything is going to be successful, but certain things are going to be successful. And if you concentrate on what is your audience, what do they need from you, and what can you bring into this space, then you are a good part of the way in terms of creating great content. But I also have to say, there's hits and misses out there, and companies need to learn what is the right hit for their audience and for their company. And I think that's where we're going to see a big change the next couple of years. What stays evergreen online, and what happens in these moments in time. And yeah, I think it's very exciting to see some of the innovation happening in this space, and also some of the companies that are really embracing this online and offline space.
I would like to jump in here because talking of virtual events, actually, we've gotten the comment here and there that they still think that they're a little bit behind at the moment, especially, I mean, these are new, these virtual events, and especially in the B2C world, like South by Southwest has been offering a virtual element for those who can't attend for years. So I don't know if someone would like to touch on that a little bit. Rikke, would you like to start?
I'm a big fan of the events such as South by Southwest, but also the Web Summit in Portugal that has both elements. And I think we can learn a lot from it in the B2B industry, how those things have been running. But again, for me, it's all about the right content, and it's about how do you keep people entertained for that amount of time. If I'm in a big hall somewhere in some European city or American city, I'm kind of stuck there, and it's natural for me to go to seeing the keynote speakers and going to see the booth, talk to people in the booth. But when you're trying to engage me when I'm as here alone or in the office, you need to have a really good content to keep me engaged with your message for a significant amount of time. And that's the biggest challenge for me that I see for companies. How do you do that? How do you do nearly big productions as they do in the South by Southwest with much bigger investment than, for example, what we're doing here? How do you do that as a company, and how do you embrace that space, and how do you understand what your audience actually needs? Mike, you must have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you've absolutely nailed it. That traditional trade shows fundamentally was around building a booth with lots of visually interesting elements and getting people to walk on and have a conversation. As we move to virtual events, you actually need to provide something completely different. And I see a lot of clients understanding that and doing a great job at creating some really engaging content that can be used for virtual events. What concerns me, I think, is that particularly in Europe, a lot of the trade shows are organized by the companies that own the trade show grounds. So they're still in this mindset of trying to fill these physical halls, and their business is basically selling space. If they get the biggest companies in a particular industry to agree to buy space, they will then get the visitors because the companies attract the visitors. In a virtual world, it's completely different. People are much more selective and they're much more demanding in terms of quality. And it worries me that we could see some of the show and event companies struggle because they just don't understand how different a virtual event is to something that's purely a physical trade show.
Rikke, do you have anything to add to that? Otherwise, I'll move on to the next question.
I'll move on to the next question. I can see we have some interesting ones, so let's move on.
Okay, so all right. So we've talked about trade shows not coming back, or how the virtual ones out there so far have been disappointing at times, or not as effective as in-person trade shows. So what can B2B companies be doing to launch their products, to be networking, to gather leads, all the stuff that they used to do at shows? Mike, shall we start with you?
Yeah, great. I mean, I think it's fascinating because there's now a huge range of different things companies could do. And I think, perhaps the biggest challenge is the very small companies that perhaps spent their entire annual budget on one or two trade shows. Their annual marketing budget was basically attending one or two events. These events, I mean, even if they come back, are not going to be as big and as strong in terms of physical events as they were before. So they're going to have to take a really honest look at what they do and decide whether, keeping this policy of spending the vast majority of their marketing budget on events makes sense. They just don't have the budget to create things themselves. So they need to think about different, more creative ways. And that means becoming more digital. But on the other hand, big companies, I think, to me, in a lot of industries, big companies have really failed to take the initiative when they have this incredible opportunity. So if we look at, some industries, perhaps, for example, the, marketing automation and CRM industry, We see companies like Salesforce and HubSpot creating huge conferences, and they own their own events. And whether that's physical, in previous years, or whether it's virtual today, they've created this event they own, they control, and they really have domination of it. And they're able to do that. They've got the budget. I mean, if I look at some of the companies who've been spending, hundreds of thousands, perhaps, over €1 million on attending a large event, the things you could do online are incredible. Rather than building a huge trade show stand, let's, get someone famous to get involved in the event. Let's have Mick Jagger talking at some industry events. That would be certainly interesting and different. And it would be great to see what would happen. What do you think, Rikke?
Well, I would love to see Mick Jagger and many others, actually. And I agree with you. The money, if you put them right, you could really make some fantastic events. I think it's not what we have really seen is some of the big companies have taken this opportunity and gone out and started their own events. But I think there's a big opportunity with the mid-sized companies because they have the agility to do this. The great thing about trade shows is that you actually activate your salespeople. They're there, they're talking to future clients, and it's with communication marketing departments that are then doing a lot of the logistics around the event. So you really have a collaboration between the two. And if you do that right in digital, you get the same kind of great leads out of it as you could get at a trade show. So I think that if you go in and you really own what is the communication you want to have out there, you can create a great piece of content online, but also great events. For mid-sized companies, there's also the opportunity of going together on a subject matter within industry. If you just find companies that are maybe not direct competitor, but an adjacent part of what you do, you have content and you have something to talk about, and you have subject matter experts that can educate the audience, and really you can make some really interesting online events from that. And I think it's a question of the agility and being able to move fast. As we see, it took 3 months after most countries were locked down, then you had a flood of webinars out there, and you're gonna have a flood of homemade and let's say company-made events happening over the next 6 months, and the first ones in are going to be very successful. So I see the opportunity if you have the braveness to go and spend the money on it and get it done and work together in the companies. And again, as you said, I think the smaller companies are, gonna struggle somewhat.
I love your comment about the mid-sized companies, actually, Rikke. I think that's very, very, very insightful. I mean, we've seen some of the very largest companies take incredibly conservative approaches to responding to COVID. So effectively what happened was events were cancelled. They just absorbed that budget into the bottom line. And there was nobody in the company fighting to do something different and something unusual. Whereas, I think mid-sized companies, you see much more entrepreneurial spirit, where some of the marketing teams will say, look, we can take this budget and we can actually do something great with it. And your point about, creating an ecosystem event, so an event with partners or companies that are synergistic, I mean, that again is a great point. And I think back to the early days of Dreamforce, the Salesforce event, where, Salesforce was much smaller than it was today. And it was all about getting the partner companies that were building products on the Salesforce platform to be involved. And I suspect, in the early days, without those partners, Dreamforce couldn't have happened. So, there's just a huge opportunity for companies where people are prepared to take a risk and invest some money in something new. I think there's a really bright future out there.
Okay, I would actually like to jump ahead here a little bit, because you talked about mid-sized companies and larger companies, but what about the small companies then? What do you recommend for smaller companies to do? I don't know if you can be a little bit more concrete in that matter. Rikke.
Yes, I mean, the opportunity is there. It's not that. The opportunity is there to take your marketing, communication, and sales seriously and go in and do something that is relevant for the market and that shows that you are knowledgeable in your area of expertise. You can do that because you can do these things not with a huge budget, but I think that the question is, are you going to have the same impact? Are you going to have the same impact as you could have if you were, attending a trade shows? If I was a small company in this, I would, find other companies I could get together with. I would make sure that I use my salespeople and my scientists and engineers as part of the way I create content, so I get the most out of everybody in the company. That's the strategy I would put in, and I think I think that thinking that you could do all your leads from 1 or 2 trade shows in 21 might be a bit naive at this point. So you need to go do something else. Mike, any insights?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're an optimistic person, Rikke, and I think one of the challenges for small companies is they may not actually have a marketing person. Some of these companies are attending trade shows, and it really falls to sales and perhaps some of the more admin-focused people to organize the event. To expect them to be able to run online campaigns is really hard. And the truth is they've actually benefited hugely from trade shows because people go to the trade shows for the big exhibitors typically. And so the big exhibitors pull all these visitors in, and then the smaller companies benefit from that. And I think it's tough if you're doing things online to be able to replicate that same impact as a smaller, lesser well-known company. And I think they're going to have to be creative, and it's probably going to result in some companies rethinking how they allocate their budget. And the successful ones, I think, will allocate more to marketing, and they'll do more digitally and ultimately be more successful. I think relying on everything being the same is not the right strategy at the moment. I don't see things coming back to be the same as they were. There'll be similarities, but these smaller companies have really got to look at what they're doing and take a deep breath and be brave. That's my opinion.
All right. So moving from smaller companies to bigger companies, I have another question from the audience. It's saying, okay, as you mentioned, smaller companies have more chance of getting visibility at virtual trade shows. Do you think, however, that big companies in future will organize their own event versus participating in virtual trade shows? Rikke?
Yeah, I think that's what we're seeing. The benefit for big companies is you can own the content if it's your own event. Unless we see virtual trade shows around a physical trade show really drawing in the audiences at a much higher rate than what we have seen so far, then the advantage for companies to either make their own event or go together with a couple of other companies to make an event will be far bigger, because you can much better control who is actually gonna show up, what is the audience I need to find to get in there. So that, I think, definitely is gonna be a major opportunity. And if I was to look in a crystal ball, I would see that happening in 21 and 22. Mike?
Yeah, I mean, you make a great point there, Rikke, but I don't think it's necessarily a black and white choice of either running your own events or participating in trade shows. I think there'll be many big companies that still participate in events that are organized by third parties, but also run their own events online and get all the advantages you said about owning the messaging and owning the branding. However, if I was running marketing for a company that had a significant physical trade show budget, I would be moving a pretty large chunk of that into events that I owned and I controlled. And I think this might be the challenge for physical trade shows, is that the big companies aren't going to disappear, but the revenue those physical trade show companies get is going to be much smaller. Those big exhibitors are going to shrink their stands because they're going to move the budget into a range of things rather than just focusing it on the event. And to me, that's going to be a challenge. That's going to shrink the size of physical trade shows, which in turn is going to reduce the number of visitors. It could end up being a bit of a vicious cycle where we see trade shows decline somewhat. And maybe that's inevitable. I mean, maybe the move online does mean that physical events will decline over the next few years.
Okay, but what impact does that have on networking then? I see here the question pop up a few times. A big value for trade shows and conferences is in networking. Virtual can never replace networking. So, Mike, do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Kim. I think you're absolutely right that virtual trade shows don't replace the networking element of physical trade shows. And frankly, some of the biggest mistakes you see with companies trying to create virtual events is trying to literally take what happens physically and make it all happen online. That just doesn't work. You've got to do things differently. So I think the networking is going to be somewhat of a challenge going forward because there is going to be less physical interaction, less in the way of people meeting serendipitously at trade shows. I'm not sure that there's an easy answer to this. I think that networking will be different to how it was 2 years ago. And it's not going to be about meeting people for a beer at a trade show, but it's going to be more about, perhaps organizing Zoom calls or, cultivating your LinkedIn network or other social networks. And to me, there is going to be a change in the way people work and the way people build relationships. I don't know, Rikke, do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, of course, you're not going to just bump into people, but I've been on virtual events the last couple of months where I've seen people talk in the chat or comments or doing comments on Twitter during the events. But that's a good point. And I have reached out to them and had a conversation. Very funnily enough, Mike, you and I have never met in real life, right? I started and you started in Eurocom around the same time. So we have had a virtual relationship. That sounded bad, but we've known each other virtually for 9, 10, 12 months. So it can be done. And you see a lot of people now being comfortable with this space and getting to know people in this space, which I don't think they were a year ago. So yes, it doesn't completely replace, and I can't taste the beer. But there's a lot of relationships being created online and networking being done online that I think is good enough for now. But we all looking forward to sitting in a bar somewhere and talk and shoot the breeze and talk business. But we don't necessarily need trade shows for that.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly are all looking forward to the beer. I think that's true. But to me, I think that over the last couple of years, there's been a trend I've noticed, and there should be a word for feeling that you've met someone physically when you never have. Once you engage with people online and you're maybe emailing and chatting and then video conference, you always feel like you've met that person. It can be very easy to talk to them as though you've met and you know each other well. But actually the reality is you've primarily engaged through email and then seeing their background on LinkedIn. And I think that shows how powerful virtual networking can be. It is tough and it is hard to build that up. And I think people are going to have to work more at building their network online than they necessarily would have done at physical events.
All right, both. Unfortunately, we're running a little bit out of time here. So what I would like to do now in the last few minutes is have each of you maybe give your top takeaways, your key takeaways when it comes to alternative to trade shows, what you would like our audience to retain. So Mike, should we start with you then?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, from my point of view, one of the key takeaways is that actually people have kind of sat for the best part of a year, and a lot of them haven't taken advantage of opportunities. And to me, there's a huge opportunity online, particularly in terms of, the mid-size and larger companies creating their own online events. And that is really the opportunity. I mean, don't try and replicate something online, build something new, maybe take a bit of a risk. But the reality is if you rethink your budget, the virtual events are much, much cheaper than physical events. There's no travel, there's no building of physical booths, there's no buying of beer. So I think, take advantage of opportunities now. That would be my big takeaway, and really think about what you could do to leverage online events.
Over to you, Rikke.
Yeah, Mike is saying that I'm more positive. I am more positive when it comes to trade shows, because we're seeing that trade shows are still happening, especially in the niches, in the specializations. And there, my biggest takeaway that I would like the audience to take is that look at what you can create around it. You have a moment in time where the whole industry is talking about a subject matter. How can you lash onto that, and how can you make the experience for the people that can't make it, either because of budget cut or travel restrictions? How do you give them an experience at home that shows that you are really a market leader, and that you know how to engage them to the trade show? So I would not completely go of the regular trade shows, but really figure out how can I use them as a part of my marketing mix.
Thank you so much, both of you. Okay, so we are out of time now. But okay, to the audience, don't worry. If we couldn't get to your questions, we'll make sure to get back to you directly after this web chat. We will also send to everyone a link to the recording, so feel free to share it and to watch it again. Yeah, with that said, if you have any additional questions, make sure that you follow Mike and Rikke on LinkedIn. You can ask them any questions, and you can keep up to date with all their latest posts. All right, with that said, thank you, Rikke, again.
Bye.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks very much. Bye.
And thank you for watching. All right, have a good rest of the week, everyone. Bye.